Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Terribly Drawn History. In today's episode, we're going to be covering the Norman Conquest of England, 1066 AD. Before we begin, I'd like to set the stage for the story I'm about to tell. Edward the Confessor, the current Anglo-Saxon king of England, dies without an heir to the throne. We do not know why he had no son. We looked it up, we promise. Before he died, however, he had promised the throne to three different people. We are only going to speak about two of them: Harald Hardrada in England and William the Bastard in Normandy. Another claimant, Harald Hardrada, a Viking leader in Norway who made his name as a mercenary for the Kievan Rus, would also stake claim to the throne, based off some nonsense about a past ruler and some other garbage. Basically, bullshit. William would begin to build ships and mass troops for the coming invasion of England. Harold got word and began to prepare his own forces, waiting across the water. By the time William finally mustered his forces, the winds would blow unfavorably, delaying his invasion. However, scholars speculate that he could have delayed his invasion on purpose because he knew Godwinson was waiting. Let's pause for a second and discuss the composition of Godwinson's army. A majority of his men would have been peasants and farmers. He did not have a full professional army. So this has two implications. One, that since they were inexperienced and ill-equipped, they would use the shield wall tactic as their main style of fighting. The second implication is that when harvest season arrived that August, these men would have to return home to reap their crops. At this time, when Godwinson disbanded the bulk of his army, besides his professional housecarls, he would receive news of Harald Hardrada's invasion from the north, a few miles away from the major city of York. Harald Hardrada would be aided by a former Anglo-Saxon earl that had been exiled from England. His name was Tostig. He knew the terrain and would provide a valuable asset to Hardrada's campaign. Earl Edwin and Earl Morcar, the local lords of that region, would gather their 5,000 troops and march to meet the Viking invaders near the town of Fulford. They would position their troops on a slope facing south, with the river Ouse on their west side and woods on their east side. The Vikings who were across from them were currently outnumbered, as some were guarding the ships, and many were still arriving to the field. The Anglo-Saxons would have been at an advantage to strike first, but the flooded marshland at the bottom of the hill was almost impossible to pass. When the ground finally dried, they would charge the Viking line, that was now equal to their force. Keep in mind, before the fighting starts, that the Vikings, just like the Anglo-Saxons, fought in shield walls, although their troops were a little better trained and equipped. The Viking plan was to stall in order for the reinforcements to arrive and overwhelm the English force. They had their left flank located on the western side, comprised of their best troops, while their right flank was made up of their least experienced troops. The English were at first pushing the Vikings back, but their reinforcements would arrive and help bolster the lines. The left flank began to push back against the Anglo-Saxons, and the two earls were cut off from each other. Earl Morcar on the right side did not see that his flank had been destroyed, and his forces would soon be enveloped. With the victory, the town of York would surrender in order to escape brutality, and Harald Hardrada would set up camp 7 miles from the city at Stamford Bridge, where he was awaiting loot and prisoners. This whole time, Harold Godwinson was making a strenuous 4-day, 180-mile march to relieve his subjects from the invaders. His forces would approach Stamford Bridge. The Viking forces, who were mainly concentrated on the east side of the bridge, had a small contingent standing watch on the west side too. A large group of troops were also guarding the boats some distance away from the camp. It was also a hot day, and many Vikings did not have their armor equipped and were not ready when the Anglo-Saxons began to arrive from the west side of the bridge. Viking forces, on the west side, would try to hold off so that their comrades could form a cohesive battle line. Anglo-Saxon legend states that a lone Viking berserker stood at the bridge slaying many Anglo-Saxons, until one came and stabbed him from under the bridge. With the Anglo-Saxons now across the bridge, the Normans would form their shield wall, and the two sides would meet. Although the English outnumbered the Vikings, the long march made it very difficult to break the Viking line. Harald Hardrada took an arrow through his neck. We're not sure how this happened, as Anglo-Saxons fought in shield walls, but according to the tapestry, that's how it went down. Don't blame us. This would cause the Viking lines to waver, however. Viking reinforcements would arrive and lead a final charge against the Anglo-Saxons who were encircling their brethren, but they would ultimately be beaten back. The Anglo-Saxons would win the battle, and Harold Godwinson would celebrate his hard-fought victory, until William was a bastard and invaded just 3 days later. Harold Godwinson would stop his celebrations and repeat the same march all the way back to the south of England near the town of Hastings. He would pause for a week in order to muster more troops and rest. He could have waited longer, but he chose not to, possibly because of arrogance, and possibly because he wished to free his people. The two would meet, not far from Hastings. Harold placed his troops in a long line at the top of a hill. Most of his troops were fresh levies, but they were inexperienced, and only fought in shield wall formation. His housecarls still remained in his ranks, but after Stamford Bridge, they were at half strength. William set up his army on the south, with archers in the front, infantry in the middle, and cavalry in the back line. The battle began with a barrage of arrows that were ineffective, mostly because of the cover from the hill, but also from the tight formation of the Anglo-Saxon shield wall. The infantry would push with the cavalry, rapidly advancing in order to punch a hole in the English center, but the cavalry lacked the equipment to truly be a shock unit, meaning that they didn't have the proper armor and weaponry to punch a hole. The front lines would meet, and intense fighting would ensue. Historians do not know whether what happened next was planned or accidental, but following rumors that William had died after many of his troops saw not one, but two of his horses get killed from under him, his left flank would either feign retreat or actually begin to rout. As the inexperienced Anglo-Saxon pursued against Godwinson's orders, the Norman infantry, along with the cavalry, would turn and encircle the left detachment of England. Following this, they would move to engulf Godwinson's forces, who, after he took an arrow through the eye, would rout. With the death of Harald Godwinson, the last Anglo-Saxon king of England was dead. William would ascend to the throne a few weeks later. Although he had to deal with some rebellions throughout the rest of his rule, he would ultimately establish a tight grip on England. He replaced many Anglo-Saxon nobles with Normans, as well as incorporate Latin as the official legal language, which would merge with Old English to create the modern English language we know today. English culture and traditions would forever be changed, and their history would now be closely intertwined with the Frankish kingdom, as the Duke of Normandy, who would be the King of England, was a vassal or subject to the King of France. This event is regarded as one of the most influential events in English history and possibly European history. Thank you for watching.